What's up, Liron here. Thank you for joining me in another vid. And today what we're gonna do is paint this scene. This is actually the Rothschild Blvd here in Tel Aviv. It's a picture from the late 30s, so it looks much different now, which is actually really cool. What we have here is a relic. I painted it based on a reference photo from that time, and our focus here is going to be how do I convey a cityscape or something like this kind of a scene in an almost abstract manner, because if you look up close there are barely any details, but it still tells the story. So we're going to focus on that. We're going to do it monochromatically, black and white. I hope you're going to enjoy this one, and let's get started. So if you look at the reference photo, again, what characterizes these old photos is how of a big contrast there is, and the range of values isn't too good, which is actually good for us for painting. So first I'm going to place the horizon line. It's going to be about a third from the top, so somewhere around here, 1, 2, 3. So this is the horizon line. Now normally I wouldn't have the vanishing point so far off to the left. I'll bring it a little to the right. But here I want us to focus on the values, so I'll actually stick to the reference material in this example. So we have a strong diagonal here. We have another strong diagonal kind of meeting the page around here, I would say. So then I just connect the lines that way. And a lot of it has to do with placing in the points and then connecting the lines. As you can see, the first line isn't necessarily as accurate, but that's fine. Now we have this line of buildings, and from that I'm going to pull out this extra vanishing point, and our vantage point, we are at a kind of a vantage point. It's pretty high up. You can tell because look at where the buildings cut through the horizon line. That means we're at the height of that point where they cut through the horizon line. So this is where, let's say, the first building kind of starts, and then we move all the way to the right, and we just have a bunch of these here. So I'm just putting in some random lines for now. So let's see, first building here, and we barely have any, it's just a 1-point perspective, and then it kind of goes around like that. By the way, the boulevard, as I mentioned, has changed greatly since. It doesn't look anything like that, but actually, if I'm not mistaken, some buildings kind of survived. And what I mean by kind of survived is that they were renovated or renewed or preserved, but not really, usually with some changes. So just to make it clear, these are the sides that face away from the light, okay? Just putting in this very rough indication for myself, okay? Now the buildings become narrower the further away they go from us. The reason for that is perspective, and so these buildings are going to be really thin. It's not that they actually become thinner, and they become closer together. Okay, that's really important to get. We have that boulevard in the middle, and then kind of around the bottom it goes around like that. I'm going to probably heavily edit this part of the video because I don't want the drawing process to be too long, you know. Then we have this detail here, which is kind of a cafe probably, which is really cool because there are still cafes on the boulevard. So that's really neat, but they're obviously they look different and they're newer and they have more places to sit, and all of this area just looks more packed and more full of life. So here we go, like this. It's really close to where I live. I literally live on it, and I'm here every day, and whenever I paint, like 90% of my paintings on my plein air work is done here. So this is the shadow of this kind of cafe thing, and notice how I'm again not too worried about the details, because I know I have some confidence in my painting skills, and I know I'll be able to pull this together, but you may need to put in some more details to your drawing. That's perfectly fine. Okay, now there's another street here that doesn't mean a lot. We're just gonna place it in real quick. Now the trees, okay? I may not even draw all of them because there are so many, so I'm just putting in indications. What does matter is that they go darker the closer they are to us, okay? Now we do have a couple of trees here around the back next to the building, so we want to put that in. I'm going to start placing in some details. Now I will be loyal to the reference source. The electricity poles there were very old and they looked a little weird. I'm going to preserve that feeling, okay? Because I don't want to start putting in modern looking light poles. That'll be ridiculous. Now, as for the details on the buildings, I'm not going to put in too many details, just a couple of lines there to help us later on put some windows. And this is really experimentation. I never painted from this particular type of reference photo. But that's going to be a learning experience for me. Now under the trees there are some, it's not shadows, it's actually just, I don't know, ground that was flipped over or something like that, just grass, patches of grass. So hopefully that will come through in the final piece. And then some people, just to add some light to it, because right now it's really empty and barren. So here's a person, here's another person next to him, another one here. We're gonna place a lot of people here. And once we're done with adding some people here, we can move forward, but sometimes I do want to take my time with this step because I have the tendency to stop too soon. And of course I can do that with the paint later on, but why not put an indication now? And it's best to make use of this space here, the lower area, because it's the foreground, it's the area where most of the attention will go to, and that's where we can put in the most details for the people. There's actually a person on a bicycle here, but that's going to be a bit hard to convey, so I'll probably skip that detail. But in any case, now it's ready to paint, believe it or not. We're going to get started with the first layer. Now, because our goal here is to stay loyal to the source, because the source material is very unique in my opinion, I'm going to actually paint this black and white. Now I'm completely disregarding what I have here, I'm kind of mixing over it, and I'm adding a bit of lamp black. This is by Cotman, and we're going to start with a very pale wash over everything, but I'm just going to leave some highlights out. Now the highlights are going to be the front sides of the buildings, as well as some of the ground. Okay, I'm going to keep this simple, and when you keep this simple, you don't want to push the values of the entire scene too dark, and preserving the paper white can help with that. Okay, so lots of water, the main point here, because if you don't use lots of water, you're gonna very easily run out of paint, especially in these kinds of initial washes where you need everything flowing, you need everything to look good, and to keep things simple. So I'm gonna paint over this kind of watchtower thing. And here I have a stop line. You see I have the bead, and I have some time to breathe and rest and figure out what I want to do. So I do want to leave some highlights at the back here. I'm using a very big brush on purpose because I want to train myself to get all the control I need, even with this kind of a brush, and for the control to come from me and not from a tiny brush that, you know, it helps me with that. So this is what I'm aiming for here. I'm gonna go over this area, add in the shadows of the buildings here. And again, if I'm not as accurate, that's because actually I'm also trying to work on my brush work. Okay, so maybe that'll give you some encouragement if your brush strokes aren't perfect. Mine aren't as well. It's something you always keep striving towards and working on and improving at. Okay, so now I'm gonna leave this big highlight here for this building. And it's a big mess right now, but the more I move the wash down, you'll notice how it works out nicely, hopefully. So here is the middle part of the boulevard, and here's the section with the trees. I do want to connect these two shadows under the building, so I'm gonna pull these lines down. A bit of details for balconies and stuff like that. Windows, some areas that are a bit darker, maybe even connect them with the side of the building. But it's going to be fairly abstract, which is good for us. Okay, I actually want this to be a little simplified. So here we are done with the line of the buildings. I'm going to continue filling in that space of the center, the middle of the boulevard, with all the trees and everything. Now there is this tree here, so I will darken this area up and maybe connect these two just to hint at some trees over there. Pull out some lines from the center of the boulevard so that they look like trees later on. Now here we have a very important highlight. So I'm going to paint around that rooftop of this structure that who knows what it is really. I probably can check if that interests you. So we're going around that like so. And here we're starting to get close to the foreground. So I'm going to need to calculate my steps a little better. But again, I'm not gonna fuss over it too much. Now here I did something a little different. I changed this side a bit. I'm gonna lighten it up, but in the reference, if I were to work perfectly based on the reference, it should be very light, almost white as the floor here. But I did feel like I need that space for something, so I need to fill it up with something. So here as well, I'm gonna fill it up. I'm gonna put in this light bulb, very gentle indication, nothing more. I'm going to connect this shadow to the shadow under the rooftop, which is very light as well and has some highlights. This area starts to get a little darker, and then it connects to the cast shadow on the ground, like so. And this is it. Simplicity is the word here. Now actually I went too accurate because I'm gonna need to darken everything up regardless, so darken it all up. I'm gonna leave some highlights here and there because I may use them later on for something. And then now I will switch to a smaller brush just for this area because I want to get this very gentle shadow up top of the rooftop here. So we have this kind of very gentle shadow around here, not too big, and then around here. That'll better indicate the shadow up top, the shape up top. So with that being said, we're pretty much done. I'm gonna just put in an indication for the people here. Nothing too strong or striking, and let's connect these two shapes and this one, possibly with a tree, just for composition's sake. There is no real reason aside from that. So now we're gonna, let me see if there's anything missing. I think I'll need to connect these two shapes. Here I'm gonna need this kind of a thing, and we're looking good. Okay, we're gonna allow this some time to dry and then come back. So this one's 90% dry now. I say 90 because it is dry, but the paper still hasn't unbuckled, which is very common. I don't worry about that at all. I usually allow it to flatten, but this time I just want to continue. So we're gonna start, and now I'm using a silver black velvet brush. This one has a nice little tip, but it can also cover large areas. Okay, so unlike the previous brush, which it's a bit harder to be accurate with it, with this one it is possible. And the upside of that is that I can do both large areas and smaller details, which is extremely important for this layer. Okay, because with this layer we'll start indicating all of the smaller details and shadows alongside the larger major shadows. Okay, so. And sometimes you'll just have bad brushwork days, which is kind of what I feel like I have today. I don't know why, I don't exactly get the result I want. And I'm fine with that. I'm just aware that these things can happen from time to time. So I'm just trying to do my best, and if it doesn't turn out the way I want it to, that's cool. So I'm working on some of the buildings in the background. There's actually a tree here, so let's put that in. And around the details here of those buildings that are closer to us, I'm going to start placing in some of the buildings at the back. There are quite a few taller buildings behind the main boulevard and the buildings that come with that. And I do want to put in as many details as I can. I will try and make it a little interesting too. This may be a little too dark, so you know what? I'm going to just pour in some water and let that kind of do the trick, and then soak it back with the brush, use it as a sponge. So that's a good little trick for you. And then the more I move to the back, the lighter it gets. And it's actually quite dark in the reference photo, but I'm taking some artistic liberties, making it a little lighter than here. The reason for it, again, I want to push these things to the back and not give them too much attention. What I do want to make sure is that the shape of the edge of the street here is quite organized. That's really important because it is going to be noticeable. Now I'm going to start indicating the shadows on the buildings here, making them a little darker and starting to take into consideration their shape, okay? Because they do have unique shapes depending on the shape of the building, of each building, sorry. So that's something that I do want to get properly. Here there are a couple of rows of trees that I'll just get in like that, and then connect the trees, and that's everything I'm going to do with this part. Okay, now I'm moving forward here. So sides of the buildings, put in the shadows, put in this kind of shadow here. There is this tree, and as you can see, it's very slow work to build up the shape. And with this one, I'm actually almost going a little abstract. And this is something I will do from time to time. I like to do that, to even go a bit abstract with the details and try to figure out simpler ways to indicate bigger details. That's just great fun. Now I'm gonna bring out, this building is gonna be straight flat. And for the next one here, the shadow of this, let me lighten it up just ever so slightly and then connect it to the tree here. But for this shadow, I'm gonna bring out the shape of the building on the right with its help. So that's a balcony, and you can barely see it, but you will see it soon. That's a balcony. See here? Just negative painting around the balconies of the building on the right, okay? So that's another useful kind of trick or approach. You see I brought out the shapes of the balconies here, and I'll add a shadow so it becomes a little clearer. Okay, not perfect, but it's pretty close, I would say. Then drop a few details here, and again, almost looking for that abstract, realistic look. I'm working on abstracting my work a little more, because I have been given some advice that if I want to reach the next level when it comes to realism even, abstracting the work could actually help with that. So now a couple of windows. I'm going to start placing them in, even though I could wait. I feel like I want to bring out that final feeling for some areas first, because that'll help me figure out what to do with the rest of the painting. And now I'm starting to put in those trees. And notice how just putting in these darker shapes immediately puts everything else in context. So you can feel like, you know, the lights are actually lights. And we're going again for simplification here. So I'm just putting in blobs for the trees, and hopefully these will read well. But talking about abstraction, I will need to put those shadows or patches of grass under the trees. That's going to be really useful. And then the couple of trees that are actually closer to us, I will take more care in indicating their shape, because that's going to help us read all the rest. Okay, so trees that are getting a little closer, I'm going to make an effort to make them look better. This is really a lesson in abstraction in some way. So here we go, another tree, a whole bunch of them, a whole row of trees, I suppose, and then some shadows underneath them. Okay, and this is pretty much it. There is this shadow at the edge because it's kind of a curve, and then there's this tree coming through here, and continue with this shadow. And now I'll continue with these darker details. There are a couple of balconies here in the shadow, a couple of windows. Let's see here, window, and then some kind of lines here just to indicate where some of the balconies are, some of the details are. And I will darken this side of the building significantly, not significantly, but I will darken it a little more than in the reference. The reason for that is that it's closer to us, and I want to bring more attention to it. And I will leave this nice little accidental highlight here. I really like the way it looks. Then maybe add this imaginary building in the background here. And maybe some details, you know, antennas and such. I think they had antennas back then, but who knows. I can see some, not a lot, maybe TV antennas. And then this shadow here. A bunch of shadows here at the back, and then at the bottom as well, because it kind of goes downwards into, I don't know if it's underground parking spots, but there is something there. So that's that. The left section is actually almost taken care of. You know what? I will darken this area up just a little bit. I feel like it will help better convey the light closer to us. Then another tree here that I kind of forgot. Now here's going to be the main area of attraction for the viewer. So that's going to be important. I'm going to darken this whole thing up. And it may seem too dark, but it's actually, I think, light enough, because the more, you know what, let's add just a bit of water. Sometimes when you just use the tip of the brush, things may appear a little too dark, but then the more you widen the shape, you start to realize it's actually not that dark. So there we go, this shadow here, this shape here. Again, not perfect, but definitely good enough and fresh and spontaneous. That's what I'm looking for. If you can get everything in one go, in one brush stroke, you'll get this beautiful, spontaneous, fun look to it. Now there's a person here, some shadows underneath, and hopefully that shape reads well. I'm going to switch to a smaller brush just to get some more control, and then I'm going to blend this edge so that you can tell that the building's rounded. Okay, that's important as well. Now near the bottom is where the shadow is a little darker, so let's get that as well, right around the base here. And again, it almost has to work abstractly, but I will say this, it is important to allow this some time to sink in, okay? Because right now you look at it and you can't really tell what's missing. So what I'm gonna do is, as soon as I finish this wash, I'm gonna think, do I wanna add more people? Do I wanna add more, you know, I don't know, bicycles, maybe a vehicle even, because there were, I think, vehicles back then, but there's just aren't any here. And it's important to take that time because you really don't know. Now there is this dark area here. I'm going to put it very accurately, as you can see, very accurately and carefully. Obviously I'm kidding. So yeah, that's done. We have this electricity, sorry, thing here. 1, 2, 3. You can't even see the wires, but I will try and put them in because I think they will add some interest to it. So I'm taking a very thin brush, adding just a bit of paint to it. And now let's try and do this. I'm gonna rotate. Okay, sorry about that. I don't like doing it, but sometimes you have to get in the line accurately. Like this, and like that. And hopefully that makes sense. Now I do have to connect it here as well, because there's probably another one here. And this helps to kind of pull us into the scene itself. Now I'm gonna add just a couple of details here. This shadow should be darker. This shadow should be darker. The tree trunks could be more well defined, so I'm going to just throw in a couple of them here and there. See what happens. Some shadows here at the sides of the buildings. Some details like that. These will help to settle these objects down, because what happens right now is the buildings are a little blobby-ish, and when they're blobby, it's a bit hard to tell that they're straight lines and straight shapes. Sometimes you need to have a clearer indication of that with buildings and with things that were made by humans. So yeah, so here we go. Just a bit of straight lines here and there, and that'll probably solve this. If I want to add some shadows at the back, maybe just a bit to make the buildings look lighter, so maybe a little bit of, you know, antennas and details on the buildings that will push back this lump of buildings here at the back. I'm gonna add in this line here to indicate the edge of this area, a bit of a line here, and really not much else is necessary, so a bit of this kind of darker indication here. There are going to be shadows under the electricity poles, electric lines. So that's that. A bit of a shadow under the tree here, under the people. Let's add a bunch of people walking in the middle of the boulevard. That's people, believe it or not. And as long as the viewer believes it, that's good enough, really. I'm going to add in just a couple of these lines. And I think what I'll do now is allow it some time to dry, then look at it and maybe even add some highlights with the white gel pen to maybe add some more details. I see there are some electric lines running on the other edge as well. So maybe I'll add some highlights to those in just a moment, but just some very final touches. And hopefully that kind of, the shape of what we've got so far makes sense to you, okay? And yeah, let's take a break and come back. So after staring at it for a while, there are a couple of things I want to add. So there is a bit of some more details here in this shop. So a bit of a line here inside the windows, the person standing next to it. So that's that, and I like the way it looks right now a lot. A bit of details in the shadow. So we have a window here and a window there. Now notice how it curves. So that one's lower, this one's higher. And that gives the feeling of the space, the face of the building. Sorry. Now, I think there is a better indication of the shadows under the trees, so I do want to add that in with lots of more vertical brush strokes. And there is something to be said about the density way back here. There's a bit more of a density of the trees. So I'm gonna make them denser, like so. And then I'm gonna add some more vertical lines and shadows. There's a person here that I forgot. Now I will add some darker spots to the trees. Okay, so this one has a bit of a darker spot to the right. Maybe these trees here at the front have some darker areas to them. And you've seen how my drawing looked. That really indicates the final vision of this painting because it is quite messy, but in a good way. So that's that. Now I will add some touches of my trusty white gel pen that you can see here. Got it off eBay, it costs like $2. So if you want to get one, Uniball Signo, I don't know how you pronounce that. But the thing is here, I'm gonna add some details to the rooftops actually. I'm gonna add some white details up top here. Then some white details here and there. This is really, I'm going by my feeling, just my gut. I don't think about this too much up top the balconies. And you have to kind of experiment with these kinds of things and figure out what type of white pen works for you. You know, I really I have no method for that yet. Maybe in the future I'll develop something, but there's a fence here in the shadow. Mainly what you want to do is touch upon objects that are in the shadow, that have some highlights on them. Now we have, let's add just a bit of that on top of the trees on their left end, because the light comes from the left, and see what happens. We do have some of these electric poles and then the wires running, so let's do that in white. We have this one closer to us, a bit of that on this one as well. I'm thinking if there are any highlights here, maybe on that person, these people, this person, this tree. Really just trying to have fun, mainly, because when you start having fun with the medium, you'll start doing all sorts of interesting things, just with your gut, without thinking too much. So a bit of the tree details here, a bit of those there. A bit of highlights here in the shadow, because I do see some of that. And I think with that we're done. I don't want to overdo this. I think we're at a good spot to pause. I really hope you enjoyed this process. I think there's a lot to learn from these kinds of perfect references in the sense of an old photo that has been produced with this strong contrasty feeling, and that really simplifies the process. Now the photo to begin with doesn't have a lot of sense of depth. It has decent sense of depth, but not a lot. Plus we didn't use colors here. We did it black and white, so the result we get is very simple in that regard, and that can hurt the sense of depth. It can, but it doesn't have to. Okay, so don't let that stop you. With that being said, let's wrap it up face to face. So this is it for this one. I hope you enjoyed the process, and as you've seen, really almost an abstract approach, almost forcing myself to give up a lot of the control, using the brush at the very tip of, holding it at the very edge, using too big of a brush. I love doing that from time to time because it produces this kind of a result, which I love. And the question is, when you look at it from afar, does it look like the thing? And if it does, and if it conveys a bit of sense of depth, then that's good. Now again, the old cameras back then, they didn't have a good range of values, so you get something that's almost black and white, which does hurt the sense of depth a bit. Plus, we're not using colors, but I think we did a pretty good job. So once again, I hope you enjoyed this one. Let me know in a comment down below what you think, what else you want to see more of me. Don't forget to like and subscribe. That really helps YouTube show this video to more people, and I'm trying to grow my channel. Thank you so much. I know there are a lot of new subscribers aboard, so thank you so much for joining. Very happy to have you here, and I will see you again in another vid real soon.